What is your dynasty trading mantra for early in the offseason? Critical time for player value, critical time to get ahead of the game in terms of your rookie draft prep. You could be joining a new startup draft or your existing leagues with veteran players. Welcome to the Football Guys Dynasty Show. I'm your host, Chad Parsons, joined by Jordan McNamara. And Jordan, I wanted to start off and just kick it off with one of my mantras, which is, and this goes by timing the rookie draft fever, which is, in general, move up, not down, because you have options to move down later. But yet some people think that they are being proactive. They move down artificially and proactively seeking that out in January, where we are recording this without even the declaration for the NFL draft deadline behind us. So there's a number of variables on who's even going to be a part of the player pool. We don't have that clarified. It's just way too early in the process to have much of a gauge of who's going to end up settling where, outside of maybe a select few players that you would expect to go very highly. But outside of that, I mean, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, if we learn nothing from the last 12 months, it's that a player can rise from being, a sleeper on some folks' lists to all of a sudden they're going very highly, that can help you, that could hurt you. So in terms of who you're going for. So that my general rookie draft trading theme is move up, not down early in the process, because you always have the leverage. I always say, if you end up not liking your spot, and code, you will like your spot, probably. You'll fall in love with somebody in that spot, some profile. So in general, you're probably going to stay and pick, but you can trade down probably for at least what you paid if you want to bail and say, this was a horrible trade in January, I don't like it now in late April. You will have plenty of opportunities when rookie fever is at a fever pitch, and you'll be running 103 temperature then, and everyone is going to want, not everyone, but many people are going to want to get up for that spot and get their guy, which may not align with yours.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think one of my best trading techniques is moving around in rookie drafts. So having more shots to fire in terms of whether it's picks to allow me to move up or back or whatnot, right? Having more of those, it's much easier to do that when you're moving off of some of the illiquid assets, right? Some of the veteran players are trying to sell right now. Some of the, some guys you're trying to get out of, right? If you can move some of that over to picks at this point in the calendar, like you said, sort of before it really gets heated up, you do it now, and then you get some of that flexibility. It allows you to do different things as you get in the draft. So I totally agree with that. One of the things at this point of the calendar that I see a ton of, and I think it's important to guard against, is we get in such it's important sometimes to be counter-cyclical. So what I mean by that is everyone gets so into rookies, and then what'll happen is from January 15th or January 12th, when we're talking about this, through the draft, it'll be all rookies all the time, right? People are doing startup drafts, but it's all consuming in terms of podcasts, in terms of written content, in terms of Twitter, what have you. It's all rookie content. And then what will happen is rookie drafts will happen. And then some of the startup drafts or the redraft calendar will start to kick in. And so then what happens is you get a lot of analysis on last year's veterans, right? So guys that were, hey, this person was, touchdown regression candidate, or this person is, bound for an uptick in opportunities and all these stuffs and all these sorts of storylines. If you sort of do it in reverse, right? So if you sort of study now about what just happened, right? And just, hey, here are some of the veterans that we're expecting for a downtick, or here are the veterans that we're really expecting for an uptick, or here's how some movements changed, right? Or here's how, a guy I like to talk is Cole Kmet. Like, in August, it'll be stories about how Cole Kmet was, he played basically 100% of the snaps for the last 4 weeks, right? But if you sort of know that now, right, you do some of that study now, you can get it before people are sort of onto it. So that's one of the things I really think about right now is you can follow everyone else, or you can sort of go the other way. And there's probably value in going the other way. And honestly, if you just use base rates, and I'm not advocating you just do this, but if you hibernated from now until your rookie draft and knew nothing about what happened in between and just used the base rates of pedigree and position and draft round, you'd do okay, right? So that's one of the things that like we sort of spend all our time doing this. I think there's probably more value in looking at different types of players, because especially now it get really confusing, right? And you spend a lot of time studying rookies that don't end up mattering, and it can sort of cloud out your view as well. So that's one thing that I'd really recommend at this point, is to kind of work in a counter-cyclical way and look at some of the veteran options and look at some other things about how to improve your team than just diving right in with rookies with everybody else.
Yeah, and that kind of aligns with and bridges to one of my other points, which was going to be, getting cute. And I think getting cute will umbrella a few different things. And I think the big one would be this time of year. It's like, well, I have the guy that just produced a big season, or the guy that is a veteran, but man, he's kind of getting to that point where I don't think the age insulation is going to be there. They're going to start trickling away. This could be the best it ever is from this point forward, market liquidity wise or market value wise. And I think if you get stuck in that trap, that's where I think really January, February, early in the cycle is where the trouble can occur. When you make the catastrophic, I always use, for my own grading system of my dynasty trades, looking back, 1 to 2 years or different spans of time, it's like, -10 is a catastrophic loss. You lost a stud, and you pretty much got not even close to that in return. And a +10, working on that plus minus system would be you pretty much gained a windfall like that. And I think it's a real danger to get cute, and you're trading away an unequivocal, pedigreed, profiled, and for a few multiple years, quality stud player. And now you're trying to turn that into, a pick, and then a player that I think could, do what they're going to do. You're kind of putting together in your head about how you're almost going to double up, right? It's like splitting. I'm not a big poker player, but I would imagine it's like you've got what would it be? 2 10s? Or no, wait, 2 nines or something. So what would be the thing where you're trying to chase, like, I'm going to win both of them, but yet you have a really good hand already?
It's good that you're not a poker player, because that's blackjack.
Oh, sorry, yeah, that was horrible. Okay, so blackjack, but splitting 10s, right? Would that be the thing
Right.
where you already have 20, but yet you're trying to chase 2 20s? Well, I guess would be the mindset. Yeah, Jordan's always fact checking there. That was pretty horrific on my part. Yeah, not Chad # not a poker player. It's fun to look at.
I'm definitely getting you in the game at the 2022 Senior Bowl. I'm definitely getting you in that game.
I like the shiny colors on the cards, on the chips. So but yeah, so it'd be like trying to get cute because you're trying to get 2 studs would be the theory, right? So you're trading someone, and like here would be an example. You're trading for like something high level and secure for like CeeDee Lamb and like 108. So you're trying, well, it's a good class. I'm going to get another round 1. So now we're going to have 2 round 1 wide receivers, and one of them, CeeDee Lamb, that already did XYZ in the rookie year. That to me is getting cute, because you already have someone that you kind of hope one of the 2 guys turns into. So that would be, again, getting cute. And the other thing I would say that falls in line with getting cute would be, is leveraging free agency in a bad way. That free agency for players can be a good thing or a bad thing. And I always look at it of where are they coming from situationally? What opportunity did they currently have that if they go somewhere else that for a tight end or a wide receiver, that could be level of offense and certainly level of quarterback play. And if you look at it and say, like, the running thing is Allen Robinson, right? That look at the junk he's at quarterback. Imagine if he has a better quarterback. Well, yes, if you took the aggregate average of free agency, you would say it's going to be better than what he left in Chicago. So that would be a net, like there's actually more positive with Allen Robinson leaving, but then you look at somebody else. Like I always harken it to Todd Gurley, right? I mean, so he had overt opportunity, didn't really go his direction. And so is he really going to go to as good of a situation, as strong of offense, not huge competition, yet it turned into committees for moments of time. So I especially think with running backs, you need to be very careful between now and the end of free agency. And they're still not out of the woods. You still have the NFL draft looming, where if they add someone, that could really set the time clock on being challenged or it turning into a committee sooner rather than later. And they really don't have a full-fledged opportunity and grasp of that starting role for as long as you thought in March. So I would be careful with free agency on saying, could they be leaving to on the aggregate average of the rest of the NFL? And then the other part would be very sensitive to running backs, because you need to get a very good deal, is what I always say on free NFL free agencies on running backs early in the process, because they could be ignored. We see some running backs hang out there till August, or Devonta Freeman. It was until the season, and you still did you really hold him that whole time? So the NFL draft, free agency shaking up the landscape, and running back has a great deal connection to opportunity that can be a fickle beast. So just be careful. I'm all about getting profiles and getting players that you like, that you think are undervalued, but make sure you're getting a nice discount and almost a worst case or close to worst case scenario of what if this doesn't go well in the opening run of free agency.
Yeah, I'm with you. I would just also hit on that Allen Robinson point that you just made about hey, he's going to go someplace else and it's going to be different. One of the things I would highly recommend at this point is study strategy, right? So don't necessarily get into all the narratives and stuff. Again, I think now is the most valuable time, because as this year goes on, you're just going to get distracted by other things. Like, go back to basics, right? Study some strategy, do some deep dives. I mean, we got plenty of strategy stuff, between you and I's individual work, and then all the stuff at Footballguys, right? Like, study some of that stuff. Like, now's a good time to sort of go back to that, sharpen up your skills. And one of the things with free agency, and one of the things that I always look at is the, particularly with wide receivers, a wide receiver is basically worth about 1.65 to 1.75 points per target. It's historically been about the number. It'll go up higher than that. It'll go lower than that in certain years, but that's largely variance. And those things are very fickle year over year, right? There's basically no relationship year over year between the number, basically meaning it always really regresses back to towards the mean. With Allen Robinson, right, that's the big thing, is he's going to go someplace else. The quarterback's going to be better. With Allen Robinson this year, according to our stats, 158 targets. So that's 9.3 a game. So that's pretty robust. Good. What's that?
Robust. It's a robust number.
Yeah, it's a robust. Yep. And that's actually through week 18. So he had 151 through week 17. It's popping up the all the numbers there. And then when you sort of look at the at his points for the season, his PPR points, 262.9. And so when you sort of put that out, it's about 1.7, right? So that's about what you would expect in terms of the number that he got, right? So expecting a huge uptick from him in free agency because he gets a better quarterback, that's overstated in terms of its effect on wide receivers, right? It's overstated. What is not overstated is, hey, their ability to generate drives, or their ability to, generate more plays, right? Or, you can convert on more third down, so you get more targets, right? All of those things. I would just be really careful about thinking in hey, this person's going to see a huge uptick in efficiency because of quarterback X. It really doesn't. That's really not how wide receiver scoring works. It's almost entirely target dependent, and then you get a lot of variation from year to year based on touchdowns. So that would just be one thing I would caution about the narrative stuff as we head into the offseason as well.
You're listening to the Footballguys Dynasty Show, episode 37, with Chad Parsons, Jordan McNamara, and reminder to subscribe, rate, and review Footballguys podcasts on all of your platforms that you listen. Really appreciate it. The algorithmic overlords, as it were, with all of that on the Audible channel here with Dynasty, DFS, as well as all of the Sigmund Bloom, Cecil Lammy, etc. content that comes out throughout the calendar year. And also, you want to sign up for that Footballguys daily email update from Joe Bryant. All of your news that you need over there at footballguys.com/free to sign up and be a part of that daily delivery system. And Jordan, another thing I wanted to ask is that, we've seen a movement the last 2, 3, 4 years of Superflex. It's now, I kind of think that it seems like people still mention it, but if I don't see anything, you can kind of tell by the rosters. But one quarterback is kind of like a dinosaur. I mean, they're sort of the leagues that you joined 5 years ago. And I know there's still plenty of major platforms, FFPC, but they've started offering Superflex and a number. I just think we're moving in that direction. And I would say, is the next big moving piece, or is this too far of a bridge to travel? Is it going to be too tight end? Or what do you think the next, like in 5 years, the Superflex movement we've seen, what do you think the next movement is? And frankly, for positional value, should it be too tight end because one tight end is becoming a little left behind with positional value?
You and I play in a 2 tight end league together, and we co-GM a team, and it's great. And I'll say, if you haven't played 2 tight end, it can be it can feel a little bit masochistic at times, right? You're like, who are we going to pick up and start this? You're sort of getting out to the fringes of relevancy. But I will say, in terms of going from 2 tight end back to 1 tight end, right? In terms of all that study and all those tight ends we looked at in rookie drafts and we study in free agency, and we're looking at depth charts and understanding them. It makes playing in a 1 tight end league much easier, right? Because you have more streaming options, you have just more knowledge base. It's the same way with what happened with quarterbacks, right? There was no incentive to study quarterback 25 through 40 in a start 1 12-team league because you're just not going to get there, right? So now you're studying tight ends that are much further out in terms of the scoring, in terms of their snap share, all of those things. It can be really, really helpful in terms of finding in-season streamers for your start 1 league. So same with Devy. I think that's a good, anytime you get into those different formats where exposure to different players, it's good. I'm not sure the community's there on the tight end stuff. I think people are more frustrated with tight end in terms of would rather abolish the position than they would add another starting requirement. So, what I could see happening more is creating like more of a hyper flex or less positional requirements. And there might be guys that actually test some of this, positional eligibility stuff. And that would be like, Antonio Gibson, for example, when he came in, what position was he, right? Lynn Bowden, what position is he, right? And I think we're seeing more and more of this. It would be, going away from positions and going to a more, independent lineup setting structure, right? Whether that's you got to start 1 minimum and have 8 flexes or whatever. Having more of that, I think, is really interesting. And the best part about that, it's my favorite format is to actually play start 2 QB, start 2 tight end, and then a bunch of flexes, right? In terms of the running back and wide receiver position, because you have a whole lot of different roster constructions that you can implement. And that's one of the things, like, picking players is really tough, but having a strategy that's highly efficient can really help you, right? And that can give you an edge beyond just picking players better than the rest of the league. So that would be one thing that I'd be interested in seeing, is more flexible lineup constructions. But I love the 2 tight end format. I think we're probably you and I are on a very small island with that. It would be my hunch.
Yeah, I tend to agree that what I see out there is more of the like, man, what if I see a lot more people are open to the premium scoring, but what I would say is that moves the needle, but it's not. I generally find people overrate it's 1.5 or 1.75 or 2.0. Yes, but really when you get a higher baseline, of more mandatory starters, that's what moves the needle the most in terms of getting guys up in a startup draft, getting guys up in rookie drafts on an annual setting, and creating positional demand. Now, what I would say is, if the NFL is moving to a point where there's not a lot of tight ends that are truly viable, that if you take it to where it's not required anymore, that's sort of like if kicker wasn't mandatory and now it's a flex. How many kickers would be owned? How many kickers would be rostered in a dynasty league? It's an interesting thought process, but so I feel like that's almost suppressing, like, oh, that's like you're patting the kid on the head. Oh, that's nice. That's nice that you play tight end, but there's only 4 or 5 of them that are rostered at all. And then it would turn into our, more than 1 or 2 maybe rostered in rookie drafts. I feel like, and I have a hard time thinking that it goes that way. But I also find when you start monkeying with scoring as well, I mean, what are we doing here, right? Because now you're manipulating. Like I've always thought, like when I first started, I was like, man, passing touchdowns are 4 points. I was like, who came? Like, what are we doing? Because, I mean, a touchdown 6 points.
Right.
And then you can get to the. Yeah, I mean, we could have Adam Harstead on, and we're talking about, like why is there PPR scoring? You don't get a point for like. So there's a lot of like, if you truly want to make it accurate to the NFL game, there's a lot of things to be done. But I kind of feel like 2 tight end is a little more niche. And if you want to go a lot more niche, you've got things like Devi and things like that. I still don't think, point per carry is going to really quote unquote catch on, but it does feel like Superflex is the one thing. But I find that interesting because now you're bringing a lot more quarterbacks into play, yet they don't want to do that with tight end. And I think that's because, well, we don't want Dalton Schultz to actually be valuable. We don't want backup tight ends to be like some of them to be auto roster players. Like we don't want someone super excited they picked up Tyler Conklin. Like we don't actually like that doesn't sound like fantasy. Fantasy is a positive word. So we don't want that to be the actual yeah. That sounds like pain, and I just don't want to know the position that well. So yeah, I mean it seems like quarterback is more of the glamour position, and they're more open to that in an aggregate market sense than 2 tight ends. But I will say, cutting your chops, I mean, the league we're in, and you can add some other components where you start going deeper, and your working knowledge of more positions and more players at each position really becomes a net positive for waiver wire, deep plays, and things like that, streamers, of just your working knowledge when you do get into more typical leagues that have maybe 10 fewer roster spots and stuff like that. So let me ask you this. You mentioned a flex centric, more optionality with lineups. Is it, do you prefer, like a 1-1-1 with a lot of flexes sort of approach? Or I would ask this as a probing question, why not do 0? Like, why is it even mandatory to start 1 at any particular position if you level-ish the scoring?
Listen, if you could tell me that I could join a dynasty league where I didn't have to roster a wide receiver, I would be absolutely in on that. Like I'm all aboard that train. I just find that hard to believe.
As an experiment. No, I've seen those before. Well, they'll do they'll put a max of like 2 quarterbacks, but then everything else it'll be like 8 or 9 flexes, and build your team however the heck you want. So that's Jordan's dream.
Yeah. Just
like can have 4 teams and build them all different ways, just to do a thought process here and see how it goes. Yeah. Wow. So you would go the way of no wide receivers.
I like, it's funny because I think you could actually this year. I think it's probably doable to go wide receiver heavy just because the way the market is. Like I'm in a startup draft right now. You'd be like, oh man, I was like, there's some pretty good value in like the double-digit rounds where that tends to never be the case. Some actual people that you should take there instead of just roster fodder. So each year is different, but generally speaking, I think it'd be interesting. Like one of the things that I love about Dynasty is the difference of strategy, right? Like the difference, hey, like let's try something. Right now I'm in a startup draft that I'm kind of taking a different approach than I've really ever taken. And I'm going really early in a draft just because I want to see what the markets look like so that we have stuff to talk about and research topics and all that stuff, but at the same time try out some different tactics, right? And so that's one of the things that I like to do. And if you can create more avenues to be competitive, right? Different structures and different, or a lack of structures that doesn't force people to take a lot. And I suspect, I'm in leagues where I have to start 1 wide receiver and I roster a couple of them. Right. Or I have been in a league where, you have to roster 2 running backs and someone rosters 3 and rosters 18 wide receivers. Like that's really interesting. Right. Because again, I think I have a massive edge on that person. And I would like to see that played out over years and years and years. If they weren't forced to take running backs and I wasn't forced to take wide receivers, right? Sort of put what I think is an efficiency into play. Yeah. I'd be like, all right, let's just roll this sucker down the hill and see what happens. Right. That would be something that would be a lot of fun. So I like in those things because it allows you to make, more decisions. And I'm basically across the board like that. Right. So I like more roster spots, anything that can give you more ability to implement a strategy. I'm all for.
Make more decisions. Like increase the sample size even through roster spots. And I would wonder this though, if there's no positional need, right? Nothing is really required. So the whole like I'm light at tight end or I'm heavy at like there is no. I wonder in a league like that where everyone can kind of do their own thing and meander, do you think there would actually be less trading because no one would technically need a tight end or need a running back? I mean, you could literally just sit in your corner and everyone's counting their chips, and just like, oh, I like what I have. Well, I like what I have. Well, we're never gonna make a deal. All right, see you later. Good to see you, Bob. Like, I feel like you might just be like alone in your own thoughts, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I just wonder if the natural number of dynasty trades that would occur would be a lot lower in a format like that because there's no looking around and saying, well, I have too much or too little of this.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. People aren't going to necessarily need to quote draft for need. We'll still probably make that mistake, but that's probably be something a little bit less common. I'll be interested in. I think you and I are sort of in the same boat on this in terms of we've moved a little bit on strategy in recent years. Probably a part of both of our independent work sort of coming together on different efficiency things. We identified warp and a-warp and sort of the inefficiencies that are there that we can, just keep exploiting that I don't think the market's ever going to catch up on because it's just not that, it's not eye candy. Right. But that puts us in a different, position in terms of right now, in terms of, making trades in August, right? We end up having rosters that aren't particularly attractive to off-season trades, right? Because we're not rostering a ton of like up-and-coming wide receivers, or we're not rostering a ton of, a ton of depth from there. The Dante Pettis types who are big boom guys in training camp. We're just not in on that because historically it's a pretty bad strategy, so we're just avoiding it. And then what I tend to find ourselves in is we're in an efficient roster setting. We have a pretty efficient roster, but we're almost contrarian to the point of not being attractive to other people. I think it's the right strategy, but I find myself, it can be a little frustrating at times because you're almost counter-cyclical in terms of like a lot of my trading gets done in rookie drafts and then in season. Because that's where I'm sort of best at extracting the value with my team builds. And I wonder if you've run into that as more you've tried to trade your rosters, as more as you tried to move away from some of the sexy roster syndrome that tends to dominate Dynasty in terms of more move to efficient and practical roster construction.
Yeah, I absolutely have. Last off season was kind of the first one where I kind of truly felt it and could observe that about myself and trades that I would typically have a little more access to. And then this season, especially where it's going to be, if you have let's just say a bucket of five reserve spots that, if they were a blend of other positions where now let's say they're all running backs where you're kind of seeing, let's how this filters out in free agency, the draft, and, maybe two of those end up on your week one roster, maybe three of them, something like that, but certainly not all five, that you're not going to roll lucky sevens there. But yeah, those definitely don't have a lot of cachet unless you have, some of the guys, maybe Chase Edmonds qualifies or, there are select ones that could see that sort of opportunity and perceived bump, early on in the offseason to give you that liquidity. So but yeah, like you said, not having the potential uptick or shiny wide receiver, tight end, it's kind of tough, to really have that positional value. We do see select quarterbacks, but it's mainly that running back versus wide receiver. And yeah, I think it really is sort of you have to live inside of your own ecosystem is what I would say is probably more of the mental hurdle for myself as a GM of this transition. So you kind of have to say, I'm making select trades. It's not going to be as voluminous as it was before. And I'm kind of positioning myself for what I want to do in the rookie draft. And I will say more than the years and years previously, it was that now I'm more and more open to not now, but dealing away rookie picks or trading down because there's some tremendous veteran values just by sometimes shifting down a few picks because we've said it before, it's tough to move up at rookie draft time in the draft. And so to leverage that, you can actually be the vehicle for someone to move up. If you are willing to move down, I'm not going to say you can ask for whatever you want, but when you sit on the clock and someone wants it, startup draft is, to me, not as much as the rookie draft setting. Because rookie draft, I think you have a more finite, this is the player that's, a smaller subset of players. And if they're coming from 4, 5, 6 picks away, the likelihood that they get their guy by staying, depending on how ADP looks, is near minimal. So that's a true position of power that I've seen a lot of good veterans and good profiles that you're able to get, the unsexy players that are, 29, 30-year-old wide receivers, that if you're just willing to move down, or true backup, but, not super flashy running backs, and we get all the way to May, you kind of have some good clarity on that. But yeah, if you're just willing to move down a little and you're like, well, I kind of prefer this guy, but it's still a tier. So I'm getting something for nothing, and just being open to all those possibilities. And like you said, it's almost kind of going against the cycle of what you should be interested in. And I think with selectivity, and so I've been more open to moving down in rookie drafts, but specifically to pick up within a tier of rookies, staying within that, or even moving out of it, but picking up veterans. That's something 5 years ago that I just did not do very much at all, that I've definitely done last year, and I'm planning to do again this year.
Would you say in terms of your trades made in rookie drafts, what percentage of them are move back versus move up?
Oh, I have that exact number. Oh, you are
like within the draft. I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
No, it's I want to say moving down is like a 90.
Yeah,
it's 80 to 90% for sure.
Yeah.
I know in startup drafts. Actually, wait, yeah, I tracked it. It was it was 90% of the time trading down in last year's rookie drafts. If I made a move in rookie drafts, just because, I mean, we've talked about it before. I mean, the sharpshoot factor, if you move up, because you're getting one guy, you're moving up, you're giving up likely multiple things, or you're moving way back with your other pick. You're trading 204 and 210 for 112 to move up, and then 402. Like you have to move way back, with that other pick, even if it is a 2 for 2, or you pick up a future third or fourth or whatever it is. But now it's all on that one pick you're moving up for. So it's really got to be worth your while. And if you're picking up the multiple picks or an extra pick later, all those types of things, you just have more outs to put another let me put a wrong card game. Pinochle, another Pinochle. You have so many more outs if you're, just like Pinochle. So, or the game of Sorry, right? I mean, sometimes you just don't have many outs. Many outs there. But more chances, greater than less chances, with rookies, especially when you're still operating within tiers. And I think that's why we've said before, I mean, tiers are such a powerful tool as opposed to the 1 through 30 or 80 or whatever your ranking system is.
Yeah.
Let's go do a couple of trades to finish out here, because I had one that I thought was pretty interesting. We've talked about Calvin Ridley before, and I think he's a pretty interesting case this offseason, but the profile he's been building. This one is Calvin Ridley and a mid-2021 first. I think it's 105, 106 when I looked at that. And Paris Campbell for Cam Akers, who obviously finishing the year different than he was miring for about 2 months in the middle of the season, and Terry McLaurin. So Paris Campbell's the throw in there. You got Ridley in a mid first for Akers and McLaurin.
This is interesting because as I'm thinking about this, like I sort of did what you did on Paris Campbell. He's a throw in. He's more of a throw in than he is a value. So let's just take him and set him aside for a second. What's the difference between McLaurin and Ridley? Because I don't think it's super much. Right. And then you're basically getting
wow, you're going a different direction. Because I was saying I think market wise, Ridley and Akers are pretty close.
Oh, you think Ridley and Akers are pretty close? Okay. All right. Yeah.
I guess I'm more bullish on Ridley than you are.
No,
I do think McLaurin's undervalued.
But
I do think McLaurin's underrated.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you have a wide receiver who's posted back-to-back top 24 seasons early in his, in the first 2 years of his career. He's going to be 25. That's pretty lucrative as a historical profile. I get some of the college production stuff, but we quote know he's good. And ultimately I sort of look at like him and Ridley and what's the warp gap there, right? Maybe it's, I don't know. And then I sort of compare him, I compare Akers to that pick, and I'm like, all right, like that's a pretty big.
Well,
that's a pretty big warp.
I mean, sorry, you take Akers for sure. Yeah, if you're doing that comparison. Well, and I was even going to say though, even if you have Ridley and Akers close, the mid first for McLaurin, I mean, I think you bank McLaurin. Even though the likelihood you're going to get a top, let's say 25, NFL draft pick at wide receiver, and a good profile. The point is they haven't banked anything, and so the risk factor is still relatively high. Now, I would say, there's a potential, and this is always the carrot that gets some people in trouble. You have the potential that pick can turn into something better than McLaurin, but you're hitting a solid double or triple in that comparison by having McLaurin, because I think, I think there's untapped potential from McLaurin that you can actually say that sort of within Washington's offense, he's been miring away, and yet he's put up 2 quality seasons to start.
Yeah, and I guess the other way to think about this is, would you take take out the quarterbacks for a second? Would you take Akers at 101 in the rookie draft? Right? Would you take Akers with what you know right now ahead of anyone coming out? And
you should. I would say you should.
Right. And so then if you think about, okay, well, that's 101. So what's the cost to actually trade from that gap of we're just throwing 105 in there and saying, all right, well, Akers, that's actually a huge gap, right? That's probably the cost of a future first, right? So when you think about that, that's actually a ton more on the Akers side ahead of that pick. So yeah, I'm on getting the Akers side in that deal.
Yep, I agree there. All right, we haven't talked about Robert Tonyan much, but this is a tight end centric one, and it is super
touchdown rate. Robert Tonyan, is that who we're talking about?
Yes. We have Cole. This is a one tight end league. We have Cole Kmet, Robert Tonyan, and a third for Noah Fant.
Smash Fant.
Right.
Smash Fant.
Yeah, for Cole Kmet, I think he's a nice player from what we've seen. And yes, we usually see year 2, year 3 expansion, but to me, he's going to be closer to just a guy. He could be good, but within the landscape of difference-making tight ends, I think he's just a guy. And Tonyan, I mean, I'm not saying Jay Sternberger is going to take his job or anything, but a super touchdown-centric. And when you look at the rarity of a guy popping up like he did, this is pretty much like a 1 in 100 sort of shot that he did what he did. And so the perfect storm aspect, you double down on that. I think bad things happen in general.
Yeah. It's worth noting that him and Logan Thomas this year are both basically 1 in 100 shots. Right. So
right.
I think,
and Logan Thomas is a lot cheaper, right? So of the two, which one would you rather have when you have a big cost difference there?
Sure.
All right. We've got a 14-team 1 QB league, and this is Justin Herbert and Jalen Reagor for Drew Lock and Kenny Galladay. Can we consider this just for Kenny Galladay? Is that appropriate, or?
Yeah.
Throw out Drew Lock at this point? Okay.
Yeah, Drew Lock's one of the worst starting quarterbacks in the league, and I think they probably, I don't know, they have a new front office. We'll see what they have to do.
Their games are over, so technically, I don't know if we should view him as the starter. So
yeah, he's firmly on the TBD, the question mark. Got to be careful. We don't want his mom calling in and complaining about us. I think the answer here, again, and it's worth noting, going from 12 to 14 teams is a bump for a quarterback. So just in terms of Herbert, right? That is, you can say, oh, quarterbacks don't matter, whatever. Going from 12 to 14 teams does matter at quarterback. Drops to the replacement level, and having another guy, right, to stream someone, you're really scratching the Drew Lock bottom of the barrel type of streamer. That gap to Herbert is very big there. I'd probably take the Reagor side of this because with Galladay, there's a lot of unknown, and not that there's not with Reagor, but I feel like he's a little bit more insulated. Generally speaking, I guess you could go as a general rule, when you get a guy that is at the same cost in terms of startup ADP, you take the guy that's hit over the guy that hasn't hit. So that's one way to look at this. I am a little bit concerned about Galladay's track. And Galladay is actually one of the players that's forced me to rethink how I think about the wide receiver position. So I'm not anti-Galladay. He's opened my eyes to new things. I'll sort of have the Kenny Galladay rule now. You know what I mean? So all of those things. I'm just nervous about what his next 6 months is going to look like. Right? There's free agency. Is he tagged? Is Stafford gone? Right? Just a lot of things right there. I think you're insulating with too much safer profiles at this point. And whenever you're hitting free agency coming off an injury, it's never a sure thing. So I really like where Herbert's at. The 14 team gives you a bump, and I think Rager still has wide receiver 1 type upside.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with all that. And I don't think it's a bad trade. I think it's relatively, within the scope of fair for overall value. But I'm on team Rager in terms of, like, I know the rookie season didn't turn out, but watching a lot of all 22, he had plenty of opportunities that either were not thrown or were tried to be, were thrown, but not thrown well. And just, I mean, again, he could have had a handful of long touchdowns or long plays that just, I think, would have changed the tune of what's going on. We know everything going on in Philadelphia, lots of change, but around one guy entering year 2, and Justin Herbert, you can kind of bank on that in terms of what he was able to do, and not as a runner, as pretty much a pure thrower in year 1. And like you said, you get that little positional bump there. All right, last one. We've got DK Metcalf. One of the pretty girls at the dance this offseason for sure. Wasn't happy, though, in that resounding loss in the playoffs there. He wanted the ball and really didn't get the ball. Actually, I think the next time after complaining on the sidelines, he got blown up. Then they ran a screen for him and he just got dropped. Sack of potatoes. So they manufactured a touch for him. But this is an interesting one. So you got DK Metcalf. Some are going to draft him as the number 1 wide receiver off the board in startups. You've got that for Nick Chubb and Keenan Allen, 2 profile guys, certainly older than DK Metcalf, but this is a stock 12-team PPR.
Yeah, I think this is a classic. This is a pretty classic one in terms of what you value, right? If you're going to value the next couple of years in terms of some near-term stability, right, and some near-term winning potential, I think that's absolutely the Chubb Allen side, right? You sort of look at that deal that has 3 warp potential in a given season in it, right? That's that side of that deal. With Metcalf, I'm below market on him as being the wide receiver 1. I guess if you're gonna, and I don't do this because I think, what happens with when you put DK Metcalf at wide receiver 1 is what happened to Amari Cooper, what happened to DJ Moore, what happened to Juju Smith-Schuster, right? Is that instead of them getting to the elite wide receiver 1, right, which is where Devontae Adams and Tyreek Hill and Michael Thomas and these guys that are actually alpha 1s where they reside, they don't get there. And what happens is they get to a place in the 10 to 15 range or somewhere in that range. And then what happens is everyone sort of gets burned on them, right? Because they invested a 103 in a startup on them. And now they're suddenly become a value 24 months later, right? DJ Moore, Amari Cooper, these guys, Juju, just somebody, we'll see what happens with him in free agency. They all become values, right? Because it's the same thing. We're just repeating that with DK Metcalf. And one of the things that I say is, I think the market, the more research I've done and for Analytics Dynasty this year is, I think the market is improperly calibrated. And what people are shooting for is multiple massive seasons, when in reality, that's a minority of the outcomes, right? So what people are doing, and when you look at the market, what people are actually doing is trying to capture, right, the Julio Jones upside, when in reality, you should try and hit a couple doubles, right? Because that's a much more likely outcome. It's actually going to help
peak season. Peak season, right? They're trying to time and hit the peak season or the multiple window peak season years. Right. And you can do that by, career arcs and ages and, doing the best probabilities you can. Mm-hmm. But, like what you're saying is, how about the guy that the peak season that they've ever had may not be in front of them, but the floor is crazy high, right? Because they've done it 5 times, or something like that. Looking at this, Keenan Allen, in my measures here, he is like one of the top 4 or 5 active wide receivers. And that includes Larry Fitzgerald, who is, borderline not active, and certainly not on that spectrum anymore. But I mean, you're talking about, and he's still in his 20s. And yet he's one of the top, guys right there with Hopkins, Antonio Brown, which again has not been on that track for a couple of years now. But like the fact that it just seems like he's one of those Rodney Dangerfields that just gets minimal respect. Yeah. And yet, and this is more of a narrative and just, sort of an artistry thing, but it just seems like Keenan Allen's a guy that's going to age pretty gracefully in the NFL, right? He's not an overt speed guy. He doesn't win because he's 6'5". And like there's some things that I think are going to translate pretty well over the next 3 to 5 years, and not predicting that for anyone in their late 20s outside of a quarterback, that I just think that he's going to be one that the price is never going up. But you can be okay with that. So for me, I mean, Chubb is still just 25. If he was 27, this is probably a different conversation point. But Chubb is one of the best running backs in the NFL. He just happens to be with Kareem Hunt, who's also very good and siphons away. I mean, we saw this last game, right? Nick Chubb had like 3-4 catches, including a touchdown. Like, he can do it. It's not a matter of want to or skill. So, I mean, he has that ability of, how would we look at his projection weekly if Kareem Hunt were out for any stretch? So it's a two-way street. If look at what he's doing, yet he's in a firm split while run heavy situationally there. So to me, I would take the functional side. And I know, like a lot of the points you made about, DK Metcalf, of like, in 3 years, could DK Metcalf be the only guy really worth much of anything in this? Yes. But I also think a little too often people are looking out to what their 2024 Dynasty core looks like with too much of their roster, I'll say.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And I think there's ways to, I totally agree with that. And there's ways to backfill it. And I'll just say, just while we're on the air here, Brian Schottenheimer out as the offensive coordinator in Seattle. So things change quickly.
Wow. Okay. And the other thing about DK Metcalf, I mean, Tyler Lockett just set records, right? I'm going to check my clock. He just caught 100 balls, and he's not going away. So to pretend like it's all DK Metcalf all the time, that wasn't even the case this year. So yeah, I mean, dealing with another strong wide receiver on the same depth chart, and then you're drafting one of them Lockett's going where? Just offhand, I have a startup going, but like the point is the difference between those two guys, and you wouldn't consider Metcalf, just a complete lock to outscore Lockett next year, right? So
he would, and Lockett out targeted DK Metcalf this year. So
yeah, I mean
by 3, but
wide receiver 27 in a draft that I'm doing ongoing right now. Wide receiver, I drafted him. Wide receiver 27. So I'm getting 27. Right? Yeah. And Metcalf is wide receiver 3 in this one, or 2, or 1, or 4, or whatever. The point is 20 plus spots higher, and it's like same offense. And like if age wasn't a factor, and I guess we're going by Lockett is so much shorter than DK Metcalf. So that's, what are you gonna do? But it's weird because Lockett's almost
how they look deep. Have you seen? You don't play in those leagues.
Well, how about
talk about different formats? We
interception
talk about
return tackles.
The profile.
Point per interception return tackles. Yeah. Oh,
memes on Twitter. Memes on
exactly. Twitter. Yeah. Bicep size. The one final thing I was going to ask is there. You mentioned the complete flexible lineups. Is there another thing, whether you've played it in or not, that you think should be more commonplace in dynasty leagues as a format? As a format or an option? All play.
Yeah. So I would I
go head to head.
Talk about being out on a limb. This will never happen. But all play, I think, is actually the best way to defeat tanking. And the reason I say that is because if someone decides to tank, really one of the things you're most concerned about is that it's going to disproportionately affect people. Case in point, first 3 weeks of the season, they start a roster, they go 2-1, they lose a couple of weeks, and then for the last 7 weeks, they're tanking, right? So they're basically giving wins to other people, and that's sort of unfair, right? With all play, you don't have to worry about that because you're playing everyone. You're reducing your variance, which is great if you're good and you want
like that.
Right. If you want to sort of use your skills and not as much luck, that's the way to go. And then what happens is you're playing everyone every week, and you finish third most points in the league, you get whatever, however many teams are in your league, right? You get that many wins. And yeah, I think it's a great thing. So it's reducing your variance. It's sort of doing that. And then you do it on like a season long thing, and you eliminate the playoffs, right? I love that format. I'll never get people there because people like the one-offs and all that stuff. But I love that format because it allows you truly long-term team building. And I've played it in best ball as well, which is a lot of fun because it's essentially you're just team building, right? And then you just sort of let the chips fall where they may. It's really that's a really fun strategy because there was a lot of inefficiencies to exploit as well. But I do recommend if you're having problems with tanking or anything like that, just go to an all play, right? And then you can trash talk your friends like 16 weeks instead of once whenever you play them in the random week.
You technically play them every week.
Yeah,
I beat you every week this year, Brian. Take that. I'll add one, which I actually have 2 or 3 that they were startups either last year or the year before, and I'm mentioning it to all my other leagues. Again, I doubt it's going to take on with more than 1, 2, 3 of them or whatever. But I really like, because if you can, we've talked before about the power of the bye week in the playoffs and all these ways that I feel that, like the NFL, where a bye week is big, but also you get the home field advantage. I know this year we're not really getting that per se, but there's things intrinsically to that offer an advantage. And I think in Dynasty, a cool way to do it would be, and the way we function is, if you're the higher seed and you had a higher point per game during the regular season, so if I was playing Jordan and Jordan outscored me by 16 points per game, and say, the average scoring is 170 points per game or whatever. So that's 16. If he's the higher seed, we play in the playoffs, he gets 16. And that's the advantage. Now, is that, 5, 8, 10% of the weekly scoring, but it might be 2. It might be, and the other thing was, if the lower seed has the higher points per game, then it's nothing. You just play straight up, because that's the advantage you get as the higher seed. So in addition to having bye weeks or something like that, but just adding on in some capacity would be, and if you're not going to do a 2-week total points or increase sample size in some way, I like, if you want to keep head to head, you're playing for something more significant every single week of the regular season. It's points. And guess what? That, I'm not going to say it's going to shift a bunch of results and all of a sudden the higher teams are going to win. It's going to be like the national championship in college, where it's like, well, we're seeing the same teams and expected results and all this stuff. But the point is, it makes you feel like, because I feel like the regular season in general with prize money or whatever is not rewarded enough. It's like, if you have a $50 entry fee league, it's like, oh, top points. It's almost like Chris Rock. Congratulations. What do you want? A cookie? And it's like, well, I played for 3.5 months and I was the best team in this league. So I feel like it should be more rewarded than, you got a bye week. Now go sit over there and shut up. And then you get beat in the semis. And it's like, well, now I'm playing for 3rd place. But if you actually get rewarded, where it's like the top 2 seeds, you actually get some prize money. Before the playoffs start, prize money, top points. But then let's say you get home field advantage. Now you're operating from a place of, I was good for a while. And yes, we should reward the playoffs. And I feel like the home field advantage, if you're not going to do multi-week or things like that, and I will say, we'll get into this more when we have concrete information, but when we get to 2021 season and the NFL has an extra week and game and all these things, now we've got some fantasy. What's going to be the general consensus on, are we expanding the playoffs? Are we just expanding the regular season? What's the consensus redraft, dynasty, etc. view on that? And we got plenty of time to get into that as we go along and actually get ready for the regular season. But I would say, just even some of these rule changes, like Jordan mentioned and I mentioned, early in the offseason is a perfect time to suggest those things, even if you just drop it in a message board. That maybe in a month you end up voting on it, whether it gets approved or not. This could be the acorn that you plant that ends up taking effect in 2022 or a future season, or spurs other ideas or compromises to make it more enjoyable for everybody. All right. So in this episode, we talked about some dynasty trading, about profiles, formats, as well as some of our mantras early in the offseason here about our dynasty process. I am Chad Parsons. He is Jordan McNamara. And until next time, good luck in your dynasty leagues.